Looking at James Baldwin's Stranger in the Village, another remarkably personal essay. I can't relate. I can only try, I suppose, to imagine what it's like to be a black American in an isolated rural Swiss village in the 1950s, I suppose, and essentially be the first black man that the villagers have seen. It's really a remarkable thing. Um, we should remember that, as Baldwin tells us, this is his third time there. He keeps returning. So he's there voluntarily, but it doesn't lessen the harshness of the situation that you could read about. But being James Baldwin, he's able to transform this personal experience into thought, which is, after all, what he said in his autobiographical notes, the difficulty of doing that. That's what the writer does. Somehow they're writing about their experience. And what he's able to do in this remarkable essay, Stranger in the Village, is to start with his personal experiences of what is it like to be black in a village where, in Switzerland, where no one's seen black people before. And then use that as a way of characterizing the African American experience. Somebody really read this. A lot of Mark may really like this. Um, One of the things that he reminds us of is that America was founded by Europeans. Um, and he has this really interesting part where he talks about, what was it like for Europeans to come to America, and then to see black people treated like chattel. How did they deal with that? And how did they reconcile that with their own moral beliefs? That really, I think he's saying, is the story of America, or I don't know, an incredibly important part of it. The tension that created, because these were people who certainly didn't think, in their basic morality, that you should treat other people like that. So what did they do? They had to deny the humanity of the black people who were treated like that, and sort of, as uh, Baldwin says, the thing that stands in history, and the thing that, is why history, as he says, is a kind of a trap for us, is that white supremacy is at the bottom of it. Is the lie of white supremacy was a kind of a necessary lie for America to come to terms with black slavery. Meaning, on the one hand, no decent person would ever approve of people being treated that way. So how do you deal with that? You create a mythology where black people are not even people, or they're lesser than white people, which is, in some form or another, is what white supremacy means. Um, well, I mean, one of the things that, amongst many other things, of course, that Baldwin says about the situation is that that world is over. That is, the, as he says at the very end, a remarkable thing to say, and I'm sure quite true, really. This world is white no longer, and it will never be white again. Another great African American thinker, W.E.B. Du Bois, who flourished from late 19th century all the way up to the 1960s, so his life and work overlapped with Baldwin's, but he was of a much earlier generation. He said at the turn of the century, around 1900, that the 20th century, the question of the 20th century will be the question of the color line. That is, essentially, can people of different races, so-called, actually live with each other and deal with each other, and how will they do it? Because he saw that the world where the different peoples of the world lived in isolation from each other was over. It was a global civilization now. And Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, North America would have to learn how to deal with one another in some way. And now we can see how tragic, in certain respects, that was the history of the 20th century, which is a violent and bloody history. On the other hand, there's just no getting around the idea of the world. I mean, he has some very interesting things to say about American whites as opposed to European whites. And he has some things to say in defense of America and American whites, and that they're unique amongst white people in the world in the sense that they've lived with black people. That is, the Europeans, at least at the time Baldwin was writing, largely dealt with black people as colonial subjects who lived in other parts of the world. The white people's oppression of black people was right there, right outside the door. And so they've been forced to deal with things and to deal with black people in a way that Europeans hadn't, at least at the time of Baldwin. Not that that way of dealing it was successful, but it wasn't totally unsuccessful insofar as some progress had been made. So there's some hope here, I think. You that is, I think this ends with a certain amount of hope that there's something charming about being in this Swiss village, about these people who are so naive about black people. But there's also recognition that whatever the sins of America and whatever the brutality of American white supremacy, that America is farther along the road of actually maybe, hopefully, working the problem out.